Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Red Donkey Projections. I'm Lucas, and we have Eric here as always.
Hey guys.
And today we'll be discussing our 2024 predictions between Kamala Harris, who's the current vice president, and Ron DeSantis. We will be doing a very early prediction. There's obviously a lot that can still happen in these next 3 years about, what the result will be of this matchup. And of course, Kamala Harris being the nominee is kind of a stretch because Joe Biden did say he was going to be running for re-election anyway, so she probably won't be the Democratic nominee. But regardless, we thought we'd do this video anyway. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So I'll start out with the safe Democratic states. Obviously, no big shockers here. Although potentially, in some scenarios, we could see some of these safe Democratic states move more towards the likely margin. But heading now to the safe states for the Republicans, or rather in this case, Ron DeSantis, who's the governor of California. I just said California, sorry, governor of Florida. We're putting those in right now. So the reason why we chose Governor DeSantis is because he's being discussed as being a potential 2024 candidate if Donald Trump were not to run for the nomination. Of course, now his popularity is slipping quite a bit due to his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. But nevertheless, people kind of see him as a Trump 2.0 that will probably win the nomination should he run and Donald Trump not be running. All right, so I'll start off here with the likely states. So obviously Alaska will be still likely in this scenario. I think because of Anchorage trending more and more to the left, we will see the state continue to narrow down its margin of victory for the Republican. Another likely state will likely be South Carolina. Again, this is one of those states where it's just the margin does end up being smaller, with one big factor being the African-American vote, which has been coming out more recently in 2020. Of course, we saw the Senate race and the presidential race go down to around a 10-point margin. All right, so Eric, why don't you now discuss the states of Iowa and Ohio?
Yeah, so similar to South Carolina, no matter what the race is, and no matter what the year, these states nowadays recently, because both of them have been trending to the right, as we've been mentioning in a lot of our videos, they're going to stay the same for this election too. So both Iowa and Ohio will be likely states. Oops, let me just fix that here. No matter what the situation is, once again, there's just a huge conservative base. The white working class in both Ohio and Iowa have been leaning to the right ever since Obama's departure and Trump's emergence. And now, if you compare Ron DeSantis to Kamala Harris, there's a clear there's a clear choice of who they're going to favor because DeSantis is pretty similar to Trump.
Right, and Democrats have been consistently doing worse with these rural areas since Obama. For example, Obama actually did quite well in the rural areas of Iowa and Ohio. Ever since then, with Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, they have not really appealed to those types of voters. So we have those still as likely. So I think there is one more likely state, which is the state of Virginia. Again, the state has been trending to the left due to the higher the number of college educated voters and how much they've been trending to the left. So regardless of whether it's Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, she would probably still win the state in a likely margin. Also, there is Nebraska second district, which is a similar case to Virginia, which is the college educated vote being highly concentrated there, and Democrats consistently doing better, rather progressively doing better compared to previous elections with that highly educated vote. And I'll quickly add here Colorado, New Mexico. These two states have also been trending on a lot to the left recently. Colorado, I do think Kamala Harris will do worse compared to Joe Biden. Joe Biden really did have an appeal into some of these voters, especially in a city like Colorado Springs, which is traditionally Republican, but he was able to shift it more and more to the left recently. And I think that should be it for the likely states. Oh, one more, which is the state of Texas. I'll quickly discuss this. Of course, we saw the state as it is continuing to trend to the left. However, compared to Joe Biden, Kamala Harris lacks that high suburban appeal to those voters, which is a big part of why the state continues to trend to the left. The Dallas suburbs, which I believe were, I think George W. Bush was from, they're consistently trending to the left. I believe the Austin suburbs as well. They're all trending to the left, and Joe Biden really capitalized on that and got a lot of those voters. I don't think Kamala Harris really has that appeal. Plus, Ron DeSantis does do better with suburban voters compared to Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump turned off a lot of those suburban voters in Texas, so we would likely see the margin for Ron DeSantis actually grow. I would predict maybe a 7-point victory instead of the 5.9 that Trump got in 2020. There's also the question of Hispanic voters. We don't really know how well Kamala Harris would do with Hispanic voters, as she has not run on a national scale with, not run on a national level in a primary, for example. Of course, some people are saying she did well in California with Hispanic voters, but that really doesn't show how the whole nation would feel about her. So we have that one as likely. We're going to head now to the state of Minnesota. Eric, why don't you discuss Minnesota?
Sure. So, I think Minnesota will probably end up being a tilt D, not R. Sorry, my apologies. Because Kamala Harris is once again, compared to Joe Biden, not really performing well in the suburb areas, because what Joe Biden was able to do in the 2020 election was that he was able to not only maximize metropolitan areas, but also surrounding suburb areas that are usually more independent. He was able to win those and therefore get a bigger margin in Minnesota, not just a bigger margin, but like a likely margin. Here, Kamala Harris does not have that advantage, and it's also important to consider like on how we're even addressing this election, like if there are any external factors, or like in a perfect world where there aren't any external factors. But here, Kamala Harris is not really able to extract the suburban vote from what we've seen in previous just primaries and just general like appeal. Her popularity has slumped for a while now. A lot of people know that, and also like her handling with certain issues, do not resonate with most people. I'm sure she will win the metropolitan areas, but just in the suburbs, it's probably not going to be a good result.
Yeah, and it's good that you mentioned his for favorability here as well. She has really dropped with favorability. I don't want to say recently, but yeah, actually, yeah, it was recently that she lost a lot of support from those independent voters. She's one of the most unpopular vice presidents probably in quite a while. But she is likely going to lose ground with those suburban voters. And not only that, even if she were to perform as well as Joe Biden in these suburban areas, with the rural areas trending more and more to the right, it's going to be a huge concern for Democrats in future elections. And as a result, the margin would narrow down to a tilt. I'm going to head now to the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin's a very tough state for Democrats to do well in, and it's mainly because it's very white and very rural, which are demographics that Democrats often struggle with winning. Of course, they can do well in Vermont and Hampshire, for example, but the difference is those type of voters have a very, I don't say a liberal type of culture, while states like Wisconsin or the Deep South, they don't have that type of that type of tradition, I guess you could say. And Joe Biden again won Wisconsin because of, one is suburban voters, two is his improvement upon white working class voters, and three is with some of the rural areas, I believe in like the Northwest. He didn't do as well in the driftless areas most expected, but regardless, he won the state fairly. And in 2024, I expect Ron DeSantis to do much better in the suburbs of Wisconsin than Joe Biden, plus better in the rural areas. considering that Wisconsin does look like it's trending a little bit to the right recently. And as a result, I would give Ron DeSantis this victory probably in a lean because, as we mentioned several times, even when we first started our channel, Wisconsin is probably the most conservative Rust Belt swing state. And given that Kamala Harris doesn't really have those strengths and that appeal to those working class voters, it would be tough for her to really win that state. So we're giving this one to Ron DeSantis. Michigan is interesting. I would think that Kamala Harris will be able to pull out a win, although a very narrow win. I would think maybe a tilt. I think she does appeal a lot to African Americans in that region, and I would expect her to do pretty well with those metropolitan voters, those urban voters. Plus, I think she would do slightly better in these suburbs compared to suburbs of a different state, for example. But the margin still comes down because Ron DeSantis does do better with suburban areas compared to Donald Trump, which is why I moved this one to tilt D. And Eric, I'll let you do, I guess, Pennsylvania.
Sure. So Pennsylvania is the, let's say, second most conservative state in the Rust Belt. So it would probably go in a tilt, I believe. I think that's like the most likely scenario for Ron DeSantis. And it's also important to note that in 2020, there were a lot of independent voters. It was kind of like the unspoken environment to kind of vote against Donald Trump. Like right around that time, a lot of people, were speaking out against him. Independents, news articles, and just, celebrities. A lot of them were really pushing everyone to vote him out. And that's part of the reason why Joe Biden was able to win a lot of Rust Belt, fact that he at the time was pretty popular and a generally liked guy, easygoing, which is why he was able to pull off a lot of wins in the Rust Belt. He won Wisconsin in a tilt, of course, but he was still able to overcome it, and it's a lot better result as compared to how Kamala Harris is theoretically performing here. And same thing in Pennsylvania. So Kamala Harris doesn't really have that like cushion. She is unpopular, as we've said multiple times in this video. And she's also not running against someone who was also really unpopular. I mean, Ron DeSantis is generally unpopular, but it wasn't at that presidential level that we were dealing with in 2020, which is why she's having a harder time winning out against Ron DeSantis. So now specifically to Pennsylvania, Western and Central Pennsylvania, mainly conservative. And once again, it's important to discuss whether we're talking about external factors where presidents or former presidents like Trump will campaign for others, or in like an ideal world where it's just a person versus a person. Depending on that, there could be other reasons as to why Pennsylvania goes to the Republican side. But in general, if there's no popular president that's going to sweep the state, someone like Kamala Harris will not be able to resonate with its citizens because they're also, most of them are white working class.
I agree. In particular, it's those Philadelphia suburbs that we discussed several times in previous videos that Joe Biden can appeal to that Kamala Harris may lack that appeal to. Let's head down to Arizona, where I actually do have Ron DeSantis winning this by probably a lead. So the thing is this with Arizona. So they are big supporters of traditional Republicans, establishment type Republicans, which is why they kind of rejected Donald Trump in 2020. It's those type of ancestrally Republican suburban areas that have been trending to the left. The problem with this matchup is that Ron DeSantis may fit the bill for them as more of an establishment type candidate. Of course, he is a strong supporter of Donald Trump, but I do believe Arizona might see him as being more establishment and more of a traditional generic type of Republican than they saw Donald Trump, which could provide issues for Kamala Harris. The other thing is, I think with the relationship between Joe Biden and John McCain, that strong friendship, plus his endorsement, the endorsement he received of Cindy McCain was very helpful for him in the state, as he was able to get 10% of Republicans to vote for him, which is a very incredible number in such polarized times right now. Kamala Harris doesn't have that strong relationship with John McCain. So that could prove to be another problem in this state. So that's why we are deciding to put this one as lean Republican for Ron DeSantis. I see. I'll quickly do Florida now. Florida, I think, is going to go to likely R. I should have done this one earlier. But the reason why we're thinking this is because, first of all, suburbs. Joe Biden, even though he did so well in suburban areas in Florida, he still lost the state because of Miami-Dade. Now, if we consider the fact that Kamala Harris could potentially do worse in these suburban areas, such as Duval County, for example, or I believe St. Lucie County, that would provide issues for her in the state, which is why we do think that it would go into likely. Of course, the biggest thing in the air is, will Hispanic voters end up going with Kamala Harris in like the big Cuban area in Miami-Dade, or will they continue the trend with Republican voters? Honestly, we don't know the full answer to that yet, but for now, we'll keep this one as likely R. I'll also quickly do Maine. I think that Allstate again is probably going to be likely. Second district is also probably going to be likely because Ron DeSantis can hold on to that support with likely with those rural voters. So now we have 4 states left. I know we apologize. This video is probably going to be a longer one, but I guess I can take 2. You can take 2.
Sure.
I'll take North Carolina, Georgia. I can kind of group them together. Quickly, the same pattern we see in Georgia is what we see in other states. In Georgia, the biggest problem is the fact that Kamala Harris doesn't have that suburban voter appeal compared to Joe Biden. I do think she can perform better with African Americans in the city, which we saw Jody Biden, but Joe Biden slipped a little bit in some big cities like Atlanta, Philadelphia, New York City. I think Kamala Harris can improve upon there, but the biggest problem is going to be the suburban voter, which Ron DeSantis will catch up in, such as counties like Cobb County, which is very suburban, that Joe Biden was able to flip. As a result, we think Ron DeSantis would win this one, although in a very slim margin. So we were thinking tilt R for this. North Carolina, the biggest problem with Biden here in 2020 was he couldn't get good enough in those suburban areas to offset the losses he had in more urban and rural areas. The thing is this, I think DeSantis will probably win it in a lean still, probably in a similar margin, because the problem for Kamala Harris is that she can't do that well in suburbs as Joe Biden did. But on the bright side with her, I think she will do better in urban areas and potentially rural areas, because Ron DeSantis doesn't do too well in those areas compared to Trump. But they kind of balance each other out, so I was thinking lean R on that. And I'll toss it over to Eric now for New Hampshire and Nevada.
So I think both Nevada and New Hampshire are going to go in tilt Democratic margins. Let's just plot that here on the map. And the reason why is that, once again, there's a different situation. And let's take a look at Nevada first. In 2020, against everyone's expectation, Joe Biden kind of performed in Nevada for reason that actually is not clear, but a few theories is that he didn't do that well with Hispanics, and the Hispanic vote in Nevada probably voted against him. That's probably the main theory. And he underperformed by about 2 points. And where no one's really sure if that was his accidental performance, that it just so happened to be like that, or that it was his real performance that no one just wasn't expecting. But assuming that this was his real performance, Joe Biden's not really doing well in Nevada. Kamala Harris will have a lot harder of a time because there is a pretty significant independent population in Nevada. I think the mayor of Las Vegas is also allegedly independent, and most independents will not vote for Kamala Harris, because of her unpopularity. And I think she's around the same moderacy as Joe Biden, but she comes across as just a bit more, kind of too present in politics. So that may also turn off some voters here in Nevada. So she'll probably, hover right around a point, I would say, right below, since this is tilt. Similar thing in New Hampshire. What I noticed when I went to New Hampshire for vacation is that there are a lot of like white Democratic voters here in New Hampshire, and there's a pretty substantial Republican population, as we've seen from 2016 when Hillary Clinton almost lost New Hampshire. But according to 2020 and 2016, there are more white Democrats than are Republicans, and here Kamala Harris doesn't really do necessarily the best with these Democrats that are in New Hampshire, because New Hampshire is kind of like the most conservative state in the Northeast. So with that being said, she's not necessarily going to perform amazingly here in New Hampshire, and she's definitely not going to reach anywhere in Joe Biden's range where he won it in like a likely margin. That's definitely not going to happen. DeSantis is definitely going to appeal to a lot of voters here, and once again, depending on whether we're considering external factors, former presidents will most definitely campaign for him to try to win the state. But because we're dealing with a hypothetical and we're dealing with Kamala Harris, she's not going to necessarily do well because of this white working class population.
Yep, I agree with you on that. And with that being said, that marks the end of the video for today. We do have Ron DeSantis defeating Kamala Harris, and remember, this is just for right now. We still have a lot of time to go before the election. And if you like this episode, please like button. If you like our content, please subscribe. And we'll see you in our next episode tomorrow.
See ya.